Good morning, everyone. I hope you all thoroughly enjoyed yesterday's sessions and are looking forward to today's speeches and deliberations. I would now like to introduce our first speaker this morning, Ahmad Nader Nadery, former Peace Negotiator and Chair, Civil Service Commission, Afghanistan, who will be joining us virtually today. Ahmed was supposed to join us yesterday to speak to the first challenge session, Climate Justice and the Challenge of Inclusion, how to ensure voice and agency for countries and communities in conflict. But as we were running late, he kindly agreed to speak this morning instead. Ahmed is a human rights activist and also the founder and previous chairman of the Free and Fair Election Foundation of Afghanistan. Ahmed has also written extensively on politics, human rights, women's rights and democracy in Afghanistan. I would like to invite Ahmad Nader Nadery to address the summit.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to this summit today, and especially taking the recent collapse of the Afghan government and the absence of a functioning Afghan government, which Afghanistan's voice is absent in these critical talks in COP26 this week. So a special thank you for inclusion of her voice from Afghanistan today in your sessions. Afghanistan, Madam Speaker, today embodies a perfect example of a continued cycle of violence and a conflict that added to the risk of climate change. And in turn, the risk created by the climate change continuously reinforces the conflict itself. Due to a combination of political, geographic, and social factors, Afghanistan is, as you know, one of the most vulnerable nations to climate change impacts in the world. Afghanistan is ranked 176th out of 181 countries in the ND Gain Index of those at most risk. We are at the top 12 mostly vulnerable and at risk countries of the climatical change impact. The worsening climatic conditions in Afghanistan, a country where 2/3 of our population depends on agriculture for daily livelihood, are already having major socio-economic impacts. The poverty, ladies and gentlemen, have reached up to a staggering number of 90% of population, according to the UN agencies, and the country was listed as the second highest food insecurity country of the Yemen. The situation has even further exacerbated since the collapse of the government. The country is at the verge of humanitarian catastrophe today. The impact is unfortunately significant on women and children. There is an agreement among experts that Afghanistan can even become worse, and it can expect levels of warming above the global average. Some project an average rise of 5.5 degrees Celsius by 2080 under the highest pathway of emission pathway. This is significantly higher than the projected global average rise of heat and warmth from 3.7 degrees Celsius. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, it would be unjust to the countries and people like us if those responsible for most of the carbon emission that would not choose the low emission pathway. And discussions this week, countries like us expected more of bolder decisions, and we hope bold decisions and courageous decisions could be made for the sake of being just to the countries and population like us at the highest risk. Our footprint is 0.2 metric tons. While data collected at least in the past 1 decade suggests all of our provinces in Afghanistan is affected by climate warmth, other natural hazards such as flooding and drought as a result of these climate changes. I fear that lack of collective action to address some of these immediate impacts would push the country further into conflict and would drag the region into conflict emanating partially or some entirely from climatic issues. And I would give you a few examples of those. First, the climate change impact in terms of continued drought, at least in the past 1 decade, flooding and other natural disasters already worsened poverty. As I stated now, over 90% of the population. Most of them are dependent on agriculture. And therefore, with drought and flooding and the heat, jobs in these agriculture sector are lost in the highest rate, and livelihoods are disturbed, unfortunately. With over 70% of the population made up of young people, most of whom can no longer work in agriculture farms, are now turning to be recruited by the armed groups. Until 3 months ago, they were largely recruited by the Taliban, and currently increasingly by the ISSK, the branch of ISIS, Khorasan branch that they call it, or Daesh, and other terrorist groups now. A second example is that the repeated drought left farmers with no other choice but to return to growing poppy, and therefore the drug economy is on rise. More opium are cultivated and produced, and that in turn provides revenue for terrorist groups and strengthens more of organized crime organizations. The target of an immediate target of most of these predicted opium and drugs are Europe, unfortunately. The third example, like most of scenarios where population, both the combined factors of climate shocks and the ongoing conflict, pushes large number of population to leave their villages, their homes, and their provinces. And there is a large number of internally displaced people, some of which are moving far behind to the foreign lands and migrating to places like Europe and other places. The fourth painful impact of it is especially on women and children. As a result of drought, families cannot feed properly, and therefore the harvest is not there, and they seek debt. And once they are in a higher degree of debt, they enter to child marriage. They gave their baby girls to marriage to settle the debt. And that is a painful practice, unfortunately, is one crucial impact of this climate change on women. Also, because women are mostly in remote and rural area, are responsible to bring water to household. And with the decrease in level of water, the destination to reach to water is increased. And therefore, a lot of girls are dropping from school to be able to bring water. However, in the past 50 days, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, officially, the girls are not allowed to attend school, especially from grade 7 and above, and they are deprived of the right. That combination of conflict and climate impact has been severe to women and children. A fifth example is Afghanistan's river. Almost all 5 river basins Afghanistan has are transboundary. Only 2 of them are legally settled and have a legal regime. With increased drought and shortage of water and heat in our region, in Central and South Asia, and difficulties in water management, there is fear for the increased tension and even conflict over water. An example would be that last year Afghanistan operationalized one of its water dams in the western province of the country, Nimruz. That affected, of course, to some level, reaching water to Iran and the eastern provinces of Iran. Heated debate and discussion in Iranian parliament about how to deal with that, and tension is already could be seen there. If situation gets worse than what it is, potential for regional conflict and more tension over water, especially over these transboundary water, is very much potential. And that in itself, a country that is affected by so many disasters as a result of conflict, added by impact of the climate change, a population of 13 million people are at added level of risk combined with violence and poverty. And that requires our collective measure and collective approach. Now, what could be done and should be done is using this opportunity in your chamber today. I appeal that to all of you legislators to earmark funds where those your countries potentially have the ability, as part of this addressing climate changes impacts, to earmark those funds for Afghanistan addressing climate change, apart from what is the developmental funds. However, development funds these days are also being sanctioned and stopped. They're mostly focused on humanitarian crisis. A continued only focused on humanitarian crisis would not create the right condition for Afghanistan to address its climate change impacts also. I encourage all of the legislators also to monitor properly the allocation of these funds that are used for these purposes. Yesterday, Mr. Nasheed said that countries who were affected are not asking for reparation of damages done in the past. But at least I appeal now that there need to be a compensation by those countries who are highly responsible for high carbon emission, to allocate the right amount of developmental fund that will address the issues of climate change in countries like us in high risk and low contributor to the climate change and the impacts that are there. Currently, Afghanistan does not have the capacity, unfortunately, to seek after these globally allocated fund for climate change impact addressing, and therefore UN mechanisms need to be operationalized further to help with that situation there. Also, there's not enough data available on the impact of climate change on Afghanistan, and due to lack of proper studies, and therefore support to collection, analysis, and use of information on what are the impact of climate change in real term on immediate and midterm, and therefore to inform right decision-making processes is needed, and therefore institutions who are, including UN and other entities who are difficult for them to go to the already conflict-affected areas and the risk of security is high, to do studies, to find creative ways of empowering local institutions to do those data collection and provide analysis and studies. And finally, I would urge you to support policies that would help in development of capacities for early warning and response to climate change impacts in Afghanistan. And through that, to minimize its impact on women and children, especially by conditioning climate-related development funds to the focus and protection and attention to the women and children of Afghanistan. I will stop there, Madam Speaker, for the sake of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ahmed. That was much appreciated. We had hoped too to be joined at this point by a representative for an update, a representative from the COP26 presidency for an update. They're unable to join us at the moment, but we hope that they will be able to join us later. But at this moment in time, can I ask if anyone has a question that they'd like to put to Ahmed? Yes, please.
La traducción está. Me gustaría preguntarle cuál es exactamente la situación que describió brevemente hoy de Afganistán. Espero por la traducción. Respecto de las negociaciones de COP26. Entiendo que hoy es inexistente. Y en ese sentido, ¿cuál ha sido la voz de ustedes, del pueblo de Afganistán, en este contexto, aparte de esta oportunidad que están teniendo para hablar en este summit de legisladores? ¿Qué otra instancia han tenido para poder expresar esta preocupación?
Thank you. Ahmed, can I check, have you been able to hear and understand the question?
I did not get the translation, unfortunately.
Okay, so the question is, with regard to COP26, what opportunities have there been for the voice of Afghanistan to be heard, aside from your participation in this summit, for example?
Well, unfortunately, there's no functioning government, and in my knowledge, this is the only venue and the only opportunity that was provided for a voice from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was absent from these critical talks.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Can I ask if anyone else has any questions or contributions that they'd like to make at this point in time? Yes, UK Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask, it's an almost impossible situation, but any thoughts you have on how voices from Afghanistan can be heard on this debate that will have such an impact on the people of Afghanistan in the longer term?
Well, thank you. Certainly, when voices are not represented, therefore invisibility creates a situation where the entire population and the country will be out of airtime and out of where we say out of sight, out of mind also. So in these sorts of forums, especially for countries like us who are at the top 10, 12, highly at risk, it will provide fairness to all of the deliberation to create that platform and to engage countries at risk. Yes, I understand today is complicated, the situation there. There's no functioning proper government representative, but it should be sought through independent institutions to include them in these deliberations, to bring in independent experts from those countries where it's not possible to bring formal, official views into the discussions. And I would encourage for the future, as a lesson learned, that need to be taken into consideration. I hope there's no more scenarios and situations like Afghanistan where there's an absolute lack of functionality of a state and government in the future. But if it is a lesson learned, that other ways need to be sought to bring in views and voices and engage those countries and individuals as experts and organizations into these deliberations.
Can I ask if there are any further questions? That being the case, can I ask you please to join me in showing our appreciation to Ahmed for joining us this morning. Thank you very much indeed.